Hi, everyone. Well, it is, I don't know, maybe my seventh or eighth video. I forget where I left off. I took a few days off because I had other things going on. This is, I'm not sure which one, but this is after World War One. And this is between the wars, as I call it. And this is continuing on with our discussion about leading up to World War Two. Um, so this is our between the wars section. If you'll remember, we had the Treaty of Versailles of 1919 was signed, and it was very harsh to Germany. And Germany protested it right away. Germany said, they did not want to sign it. They did not want any part of it because it was making them have the blame for the entire war. And they said that wasn't fair because Austria Hungary had also been part of it. Russia had been part of it. Russia had helped Serbia just like um, Germany had helped Austria Hungary. Austria Hungary gets out of it by saying, well, they're no longer a country. And Russia gets out of it by saying, hey, we signed over land to you guys and we're out of it. We're in our own civil war. So the blame was put entirely on Germany. And on top of that, they had to pay back large amounts of reparations money to all the countries involved in the war, especially France. So the Treaty of Versailles is going to do exactly what we had fought for. If you go back again to Napoleon, Napoleon had created new borders. The concert of Europe under Prince Clemens von Metternich, they had changed borders. And now the Treaty of Versailles does the exact same thing. They change borders. And this is going to make a lot of nations unhappy because they're going to say, we just fought about this. Like, we fought for our land and we still didn't get it back. And this is going to create border disputes that will continue into World War II. And actually, it's going to continue after World War II. Germany vowed that they would revise the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. And actually, they used the fact that the United States Congress refused to ratify or approve the Treaty of Versailles, which they said weakened its effectiveness. The Allied Reparations Commission determined that Germany owed 132 billion German marks. That's about 33 billion US dollars for reparations payable in annual installments of 2.5 billion marks. Well, they paid their first year and then they quit. They said, we can't do it anymore. So, why couldn't they do it anymore? Well, a biggest reason is because they're out of money. We're not in the Great Depression yet. We're just in 1921, but we're going to start seeing things slowing down in Europe, especially because they just got out of a major war. France will take control of an area. It's located in the map here. It's called the Ruhr Valley. And the Ruhr Valley in Germany was their only industrial and mining center that was making any money. So France was not getting the reparations, so they just took that valley to get the mining materials out of it and use it for their money. Now, what's going to happen now is that Germany is going to start experiencing economic issues. And to pay workers, the government would just print more money. Well, let me explain this. And I'm not an economics teacher, and I never claim to be an economics teacher. I don't want to be an economics teacher. But I know just enough about this that I can explain it. And the kids always tell me, hey, we're $33 trillion in debt, or however many trillions of dollars in debt we are. Why can't we just print money? Yeah, that's a great idea. For those of you who don't know, up until the 1970s, most countries were on what was called a gold and silver standard. If you've ever heard someone old like me, would say, I wouldn't do that for all the gold in Fort Knox. Well, there really was gold in Fort Knox. We would say that um, we would say that the American economy, if we had $1 trillion out there in paper money, paper money and coinage, that was backed by so much gold and silver. We had that in place to back it. And at one point in time, you could take your money and you could go to a bank and say, I want to exchange this for this amount in gold. Now, that's been a long time ago. um, and I worked at a bank before I became a teacher. So we didn't do that. But I know of a little bit what I'm talking about in terms of how money circulates. Okay, so around 19 so let me just go back and say that like before like the 1970s, you had to have, if you had X amount of money in circulation, it had to be backed by gold and silver. You had to have that much gold and silver put back to back it. That's what made that strong. Okay. And so when money wore out, um that money would be destroyed and then new money would be put in. So you would never have too much money out in circulation. Well, in the 1970s, I think we stopped using the gold standard and we used like a credit rating similar to what you have in order to buy a car or buy a house. And so our credit rating states, our economy stable, our government stable ish, our people are stable, and we will still never have so much money out in circulation. Like we will still, like we guarantee that we'll never have, and I'm just going to make up a number, $1 trillion, over $1 trillion in circulation, give or take a few 100,000. Okay. And why I say give or take a few 100,000 is because you can never track that money 100%. Okay. So in the bank, when money would come in and it would be written on, it would be torn, it would be in some way not usable, we had to keep it in our vault. And our banking guidelines for the bank I worked for, it stated that we could not send it out unless it hit a certain amount. And I don't remember how much that was. But it just was because of paperwork and it was because of um, all that. But anyway, so let's say I had $5,000 um, that was not in circulation. Well, and again, I'm not part of the banking system in terms of like printing money or how that, but they could print over that 1 trillion as long as it wasn't, another $1 trillion. And that keeps our economy stable. So we never have more than that. So then when I would send that money in to the Federal Reserve to be destroyed, then they would release that much more out into the system. So that's what keeps our economy stable. We just can't go and print money because then we're flooding the market with paper that has no value. I mean, it would just be like me handing you this piece of paper and saying, here's my grocery money. There you go. That's how worthless it was. It was just paper. So there already had been inflation in Germany, and we know what inflation is. We've kind of seen a little bit of it. My dad was complaining one day, or not complaining, but he was saying that my sister was talking about the eggs were like almost $4 or $5 a dozen where they live. And I said, Daddy, we're in a pandemic. People flooded the grocery stores and bought out everything. It cost more to the suppliers to get those eggs out there. I mean, they're not going to take a cut. Now, they can't inflate their prices, price gouging, but they can if it costs them more money. If they can show it costs them more money, then yes, they can increase the money. And that's inflation. Inflation would be, I tell my kids this every year that, when my parents first married, I want to say it was $15 a month that my dad gave my mom for grocery shopping. Well, I can't even go and spend $15 and get like a case of drinks and bacon. I've spent $15 right there almost. But she shopped for a household of four for $15. Well, bread was 5 cents, 2 cents, a loaf. Um, their rent was like $25 a month. And if you look at a lot of things, inflation is just how much does it cost to make things more. Now, it doesn't cost that much more to make bread, which is why you can still get bread for under $1. But it does cost more to make a house, to make a car. And so those prices have gone up exponentially since the 50s. So you just have to take a look at what inflation is, and inflation for some things is a lot, and some things it's not. If you take a look at pricing from the past, and that was another thing I always had my kids do: look at, go online and look at grocery prices from 1921 and see how much things are. All right, so the German mark will soon become worthless, and in 1914 it was 4.2 marks equaled $1. So if someone from Germany came over in 1914 and they traded their money out, they could trade out 4.2 marks for $1. Not bad. Okay. By November of 1st of 1923, it took 130 billion marks to equal $1. And by the end of November of that same year, it increased to 4.2 trillion marks per $1. They were literally just, like it was as worthless as this piece of paper right here. Totally. Workers would use wheelbarrows to carry home their weekly pay. A basket of money was left outside the store. The money was left and the basket was stolen. And so both France and Germany tried to find a way out of this economic disaster. Okay. Again, this is before the Great Depression. So the Dawes Plan is formed, and it is a plan by an American banker who came up with a loan program to help with the situation in Europe that was going on. Okay, so under the Dawes Plan, they looked at the Treaty of Versailles, and so they reduced the reparations, and they coordinated Germany's annual payments with its ability to pay. And so, like I tell my students, right now in this whole pandemic we've been going through, banks have come back to the people and said, "Hey, we understand if you lost your job temporarily, you've got to pay something, but what can you pay for your mortgage or your car payment?" And so they've been willing to help people. And this is the same thing. They've come back and said, okay, 2.1 billion marks a year is too much. How much can you pay? And so they figured out, okay, well, here's what we can pay. Here's what we've got. Let us get our feet on the ground, and then we will continue to help with that. And so everyone was like, that's perfect. So they also granted a $200 million loan to help with German recovery. Now, this is not, they're not giving them money to pay them back, but they're giving them money to help with their economic situation, to help with jobs, to help with rebuilding, because you can't have taxes if nobody's working. You can't have the government have money if no one's working. Well, what this loan also does is it opens the door for American investment in Europe. Germany specifically, but Europe altogether. And so a lot of American companies were now coming over to Europe and investing. This is what's going to hurt everyone when it comes to the Great Depression. So you're going to see a really brief period of prosperity followed by this in Europe from 1924 to 1929. Germany will be allowed to join the League of Nations in 1926. And if you remember, that was the prior to the UN group. Like we have the United Nations group now. This was the League of Nations before the UN. Now, Germany was still forced to reduce their military forces, but other nations were not. So other nations were still allowed to have their military weapons, which we'll get to when we talk about Hitler. All right, so the Great Depression is going to happen, and there's going to be a major role in the Great Depression, and it's overproduction. As silly as it sounds, is one of the things that leads it is an overproduction of wheat, farm production, corn, wheat, all of that is traded on the market, and you have speculation. Oh well, we speculate that this, we won't have an overabundance of wheat, so wheat will go really high. Well, Russia was growing wheat like crazy. United States is going growing wheat like crazy, and so we have too much wheat, and it's going to sit there and rot. Because you got to remember, this is the 1920s. We didn't really have ways of keeping it like we would do now. And I'm not a wheat farmer, so I don't know what ways we have now. But it sat there and rotted. All right. So another thing that's going to start happening is the United States is going to start, banks are going to start loaning money to Germany because they needed this to pay reparations to France and Great Britain, and also to rebuild their economy, to rebuild their country. All right, so we have too much wheat. We have a lot of loans going to Germany, and we have a lot of American companies investing in Europe. So in the 1920s, the US stock market was booming. And there was a lot of people making a lot of money. Now, another thing about banking, before 1929, your money was not guaranteed. All right, so just briefly, if I go in and I deposit $100,000 in the bank, that bank can then use that money to finance a loan. They can give 40,000 of my 100,000 and give someone else a car loan. They can take 20,000 of my 100,000 and invest in a small business. And then all the money that comes in from that pays that back and puts that money back into my account. Now that's how banks did it then. But there was no guarantee. There was no guarantee of a return, and there was no guarantee that you could walk in your bank and get your $100,000 because they had used that for loans, and that's how it was done, and that's how it's still done. So American investors in 1928 are going to start pulling their money out of Germany to start investing it in the United States stock market, because the stock market in the United States is just zooming. You cannot make a mistake with it. And people are making a lot of money. Well, and this is where I'm not an economist, and this is where I'm not really good at explaining what happens here. But the biggest thing that happens is over speculation. You're over speculating about prices, about stocks. And when people start getting kind of uneasy about stuff, they start pulling their money out, and this is kind of what starts happening. And again, I'm not an expert on this, and because I'm not going to explain it well, but just to say that this is the big stock market crash of 1929. So instead of just not panicking, the U.S. investors are going to start withdrawing their money more from Germany and the other European markets, which then causes them to collapse. And so, again, money is not guaranteed. And so the people are rushing to the banks to get their money. And now people can't pay the people they're coming and getting the money. They have none in there. There's no money to give them. And so people now are out of jobs, so they can't pay their loans. And so the people can't pay their loans, and the banks can't pay the people the money that they owed them because it's deposited in their bank. And so banks start collapsing. Because today, if I were to go to my bank, remember I deposited $100,000 at my bank a couple of minutes ago. Today, it's guaranteed up to $250,000. So I can walk in the bank today and say, I want $100,000. Now, will the bank have that much money in there? That's a whole nother subject. That was one of the things that always irritated me about these bank robbery movies, that a bank robber would go in and expect to be able to get $10 million from the bank. Now, maybe in New York or Las Vegas, but we never, ever had anywhere close to that kind of money in the bank that I worked for. And that was for our protection. You just didn't keep money in the bank like that. And I'm not going to start telling how much is in banks, because that's it. It's every bank is different. Every town is different. But I could at least go in there and get a certified check that would be worth $100,000, and then I could take it somewhere else, and that would be guaranteed funds. So now my money is protected, but back then it wasn't, and so banks are going to start collapsing everywhere. Now Germany was bad before, but it's going to be worse now. So now 6 million Germans, or 40%, was out of work. The unemployed and the homeless are going to fill the streets. And the government did not know how to handle this kind of situation. Remember, they had kicked Wilhelm out. And I'm going to go in another video, I'll talk about the type of government that they did have. But it was a very hastily put together government. And this is how bad the money was. Let me go back and show you. Right here, they're using the money as wallpaper right there, because that's how worthless it was. But at least it could, paper the walls and keep the cold out. But the government was hastily put together. It wasn't a good government, which is why it's going to be so easy for Hitler to come in and take over. All right, so that's just my little brief. I think this is number 7, I think. Quarantine history. To talk to you today about how that the World War II is starting. And then I will do one. Hopefully, I'll try to get another one in today, later on today, about the how. I'm sorry, I can't talk today, about how Hitler rises and gets into power, and then we'll try to get into World War II next week. All right, so I hope that you guys have a great day, and we will talk to you later.